Alrighty, so what we're going to do now is take a look at some hands-on with an AP, and we're going to look at how access points connect to controllers and things like that. So first up, you'll probably be pretty familiar with this stuff here. So this here is the portfolio that kind of has been around New Zealand schools since the beginning of Ruckus. Starting with the 7962, which is this like dome-shaped unit, moving all the way up to the R650, which is the unit that's being deployed today. So at the bottom here, we have the firmware version that is basically the newest or the oldest firmware version supported by that product. And so if you do have the 7962, which is the dome-shaped unit, I really hope that no one has that anymore.
At home, come on.
At home, yeah. Yeah, there you go. It's perfect for home, but I hope that no schools are using them in production. So the 7982, I think, is probably the oldest AP that we're going to encounter out there. And that guy is supported on software version 3.6. So in a moment, I think I have the matrix thing. Give me 1 second. There we go. I don't expect you to be able to understand this. But this is a table. On the left-hand side of the table shows us the access point model. And then we have the Zone Director firmware version. And then on the right-hand side of the table, we have the SmartZone firmware version. And so if we take, for example, maybe we'll look at the R610 access point. So we can see here that the R610 is supported on Zone Director 9.13 all the way through to the most recent 10.4. But the R610 is also supported on SmartZone version 3.1 all the way up to 5.2 and the most recent version. And so this tells us that the R610 actually is quite a good unit because it's widely supported by all of the controllers. But when we look at the 7982, we don't get as friendly. So the 7982, if I can find that here really quick, down the bottom, second from the bottom. So the 7982 is really good on Zone Director, but it stopped support at software version 10.1 on Zone Director. And the 7982 stops support on SmartZone 3.6. So 3.6 is kind of this magical firmware version on Zone Director that allows us to support almost any access point. The most recent R650 is not supported on 3.6 though. To get to the most recent Wi-Fi 6 access point, the R650, you need to be beyond 3.6. So you cannot coexist a 7982 with an R650 on a network because they're 3 generations apart. Generally, you can go 1 generation, but not 3. When I say 3 generations, I mean, in fact, it's more than 3 generations, right? 1, 3, yeah. So yeah, any questions about that? So this here specifically is the SmartZone firmware. And we haven't spoken about this yet, but I think a lot of you guys know, inside of the Network for Learning infrastructure, they're operating 2 SmartZone controllers. One of the SmartZone controllers they call the Network Support Extension. The other one they call the Network Hardware Replacement. One of the controllers is supporting software version 3.6, so it means that you can go all the way back to 7982. But the Network Hardware Replacement controller starts at version 5.2. So if you're a school and you're having all of your hardware replaced, you will be unable to maintain any 7982s in your network, which makes sense because you're having all of your access points replaced with R650s anyway. So why would you want to? But you can maintain an R610.
The R700 seems to be not supported for quite a few things.
Yeah, the R700 is a bit of an oddball.
Yeah.
Yep. So the R700 was Ruckus's first 11AC access point. The R700 is basically a 7982 with the AC radio upgraded. And you know this because the box looks the same as a 7982. But you're right, some schools do have R700s and you will need to consult that matrix, which will give you an overview.
So that one was getting converted over to SmartZone with a whole bunch of R700s, and will it still work on that?
So long as it's supported by software version 3.6. So if we look at this table here, let me try and locate R700 real quick. This is R700. and that's supported all the way up to 5.1. So it is supported by 3.6. So you shouldn't have a problem really. Yeah. All right, let's talk about access point firmware. When you purchase a Ruckus Access Point, on the back of the product is the serial number and the part number. This guy here is actually the R750, not the 650, but this is the 901 R750. So on the left-hand side here, our 901 SKU tells us that this access point, out of the box, is running what we call the solo firmware. Now, I explained to you guys that we have different controller solutions. When you purchase a Ruckus Access Point, there are one of two SKUs that you could purchase. You could purchase, this is the most common, right, the 901. But you could also purchase the 9U1 R650. The U stands for Unleashed. If you purchase a product which starts with 9U1, it means out of the box, this product has Ruckus Unleashed firmware preloaded. So let's talk about the different firmware versions and how that stuff works. So if you're on a Zone Director, you're most likely software version 9.x or 10.x. I honestly don't know how we've managed to have our firmware numbering scheme created and not have any overlap. So basically, software version 100 out of the box is the solo image. That means that this access point can operate as a standalone access point. You can create Wi-Fi networks on it with pre-shared key authentication, and it can also talk to a radius server, but it would be standalone and there is no controller. But it's quite a viable product. It can work if you only need one access point. We then have the ability, the solo access point has the ability to talk the LWAP protocol, which is the protocol that the Zone Director uses to communicate to the AP. This software version has the ability to talk LWAP and will automatically discover a Zone Director on the network and will automatically convert its own firmware to the Zone Director firmware. So the Zone Director firmware will be downloaded from the Zone Director onto the access point if it encounters an access point running software version 100.x. The same is true for the SmartZone, but the SmartZone actually uses SSH to communicate between the controller and the AP. An access point that's connected to a SmartZone controller has an encrypted SSH tunnel over port 22, and which means that basically it can work over the internet, right? So the access point phones out to the controller, establishes a secure SSH tunnel. And so the message here is that the solo firmware is capable of automatically discovering both the Zone Director and the SmartZone, and it will upgrade its firmware to either of those controllers. And we'll talk more about that and how it works in a moment. But if you're running an access point that's the 9U1 SKU on Ruckus Unleashed, a Ruckus Unleashed access point will never automatically discover a Zone Director or a SmartZone. And so if for some reason you order a new access point and you get shipped the 9U1 SKU, which by the way is happening quite frequently because there's little stock available of some of the models of access points, and sometimes the distributor only has the 9U1 SKU in stock. As part of our big MOE rollout moving forward though, there will all be 901. I think we've got lots of stock of those in country at the moment. But if you order other products, like if you manage to get an R610 or something like that, it may be the 9U1 SKU. So what you would need to do is you can manually log into the access point and you can manually change its firmware to the solo firmware. So you can download the solo firmware from the Ruckus support website, and you basically point your web browser to the access point. The Unleashed setup wizard will come up, and there's a button in the bottom corner that says change firmware version, and you can manually convert it to solo. So it's an automatic process from solo to ZD and SmartZone, but it's a manual process to get from Unleashed.
How does the access point running solo know the address of the SmartZone?
So it's a layer 2 broadcast. So if the...
Okay, so it's got to be on site.
Doesn't have to. Yeah. So the other way to do it, great question. Let me just, hold on. I have a slide. Hold on. There we go. Yeah. This is the slide. And so, right, so an access point that has been factory reset, you have the ability to log into the solo access point. In fact, do we have one? Could you show us real quick? So we've got an AP here which is on Solo. Adam's just going to log into that real quick.
Let me just.
Yeah, so there's two methods. We can use a DNS record or a DHCP option. But what we'll do is, or you could do it manually, which obviously is not the preferred option. If you to do it manually, so Adam's logging into our access point, and from the access point command line, so we're using the default credentials, so you probably know this already, but on the back of every access point you'll see a sticker, and it's got the default username and password in order to get in here, which of course is super and spAdmin. Okay, so we're in using super and spAdmin, so this is the command line of the access point. Now, if we want to find out if this AP knows where the controller is, we can type get SCG. So a bit of a history lesson here. The SmartZone was renamed. When we first invented the SmartZone, it was called the Smart Cell Gateway, the SCG. Our product team decided to rename it to the SmartZone, the SZ. But unfortunately, in our AP code, it's still called the SCG. So when you see the SCG, that means the SmartZone. And so when we do get SCG, we see that there is no server list, and we're currently not connected to a SmartZone. If we wanted, we could tell this AP where the controller is. So we could go set SCG IP address, and then we could type in the controller address, and now that AP would go off and connect to the controller. This is from the command line, but you can also do it from the UI. I don't know if it's easy for us to demo that. Excellent. So once again, super spAdmin in the UI. So we just browse our web browser to the IP address of the access point. Could you maybe Control Plus for us a couple? And then from here, we can say set the controller address in the UI. It's not very easy to find. You go to the management option down the bottom, and you can then type in the IP address of the SmartZone. So that's for manual discovery. Excellent. Could you flick us back to the other screen there, Adam, the other slide? And then on here, I think it's 3, yeah. So we have this manual method, which we've just demonstrated to you guys, but the automatic method is preferred, and the automatic method is a DNS record in your local DNS domain, and the name of the DNS record is Ruckus Controller.
Be simpler.
Yep. Fun fact, the Solo firmware also looks for a DNS record called Zone Director. So if your zone director is on a different subnet to your AP, then you can do it that way. Yep. Then we've got DHCP option 43. My favorite website in the world is option43.net. And that is a website that allows you to generate the required DHCP value. It's a pretty handy website, and it's supported by like different networking equipment. And when you go there, it'll generate the required value that you put into your DHCP server to tell the AP where to go.
What you do is you put in the IP address of the SmartZone, and it'll convert it into hex for you.
Oh,
yeah.
But it's a bit more complicated than that. There's a couple of other hex values at the beginning.
0, 6.
Yeah, that need to be correct. All right, let's see if we can go back to that other slide. Right. So the other thing I just wanted to point out is within the SmartZone platform, we have both a minor and a major software version. So we spoke about 3.6, which is required for the older access points, but the most recent access points will be on software version 5.2.2. But then we've got like a patch version. So the last few digits that you see in the version number are the patch version. So the way that it works is internally, our teams at Ruckus, if we get a bug report from a customer, what they'll do is they'll fix the bug, and then they'll do a new software build. And then that build will increment the number by 1. But we only actually publicly post our access point software version about once every maybe 6 weeks. And on our support website, what you'll see is these version numbers, they increment quite a bit. So if that was 1032, we might then publicly release version like 2010 or something like that. And so, yeah, the public really only see like quite large jumps in that sub-version number, but internally, we're always incrementing that version number for every bug that we fix type thing. Excellent. All right, we've done that page. So the other things that you can do from the access point command line, here's the thing, we don't have an official guide for the access point command line. The reason for that is we prefer people to do things via the UI, via the web interface. So there are a lot of debug and hidden commands that do exist in the access point command line. The thing to keep in mind is that if you change things on the individual access point, most things will actually be overridden by the controller during the next update cycle anyway. So you shouldn't really be configuring things at an access point level. And so that's why the commands that you see here are kind of really commands that help us get connected to the controller. So you've got the set SCG IP, you could set factory, you can reboot. So they're just some basic commands you can do from your access points for troubleshooting. Adam showed us that one already. Maybe is your AP connecting up? Could we see if it connects to the controller real quick? Go ahead, yeah. Okay, so we've set the controller address in here. Now, if we do a get SCG, we see that the server list is now populated with the correct IP address of our controller. Do you have the controller open at all, Adam? Maybe we could pop in there and have a look. And so this is the SmartZone. In the SmartZone, we're going to pop into the access point page, and we have this thing called a staging zone. And now, all schools see the staging zone, so maybe we'll talk about that real quick. So the SmartZone itself is a multi-tenant system, and it means that when a school logs into the SmartZone, they can only see the information that's relevant to them. Now, like I know, for example, like I think Jimmy, you're on your own SmartZone, so you don't have this issue, but everybody else is like on the Network for Learning SmartZone, which means we're on some shared architecture. Now, within the SmartZone, we have different zones. So when the system administrator, top level person logs into the SmartZone, they have a list of every single school that's in the system down the side here. And it's actually quite annoying because there's too many schools in that list and it's hard to navigate. But for most people, they only have their school in that list. I don't know, you guys, SmartCom, do you have multiple schools?
300.
Oh, you got about 300 in your list? Not bad.
It does seem to be a bit annoying.
Yeah, yep. There is a different view you can take as well. You can do like a zone level view or a list view, which may help. The other thing is to get around that, you could get a user account for each individual school, which gets a bit tedious.
As well, but
Yeah.
that's a hassle as well.
Yeah. So the idea here is if you're an individual school, you'll just see your school. But if you're an IT service company, you'll see all the schools that you look after. And so what's happened is our access point has gone to the staging zone. The staging zone is where access points live if they haven't been assigned to a real zone. So each school has their own zone. I think of it like this. Today you have a zone director. What we've done is we've taken the zone director and we've placed it into a zone inside of the SmartZone. And when you go through the upgrade process, one of the things that can happen, and we'll talk about this shortly, is they can actually pull the config from your zone director and push it into your zone inside of the SmartZone. So yeah.
They do a backup, don't they?
That's right, yeah. I'll show you how that tool works in a moment, yeah. Yeah, cool. So we're now set. So now when Adam transfers that access point to our actual zone, what we do is we move it. And so we move that AP to like the actual school zone. Now when that happens, yeah, do you want to go ahead? Yep, cool. When that happens, so it's moved, what will take place now is the lights on the AP have started flashing. This is currently on software version 100, which is the solo version. What's going to happen now is the software upgrade will be initiated because we've placed it into a real zone. The AP firmware will be updated to match our zone. So that's the other thing to keep in mind is the zone is on a specific version of firmware. Each zone could be on a different version of firmware. If you could click the plus button and pretend to create a new zone for us. And you can see here, we can actually select from the version of firmware. So when I create a new school or a new zone, I can pick that. We only have 5.2.2 available right now, unfortunately. But inside the Network for Learning controller, they have 3.6, they have 5.2, and they've got some other versions in between. And they will pick the version of firmware that is the most recent version you can use based on the access point models that you have. Because remember, some access points only support up to 3.6. But if you've got access points that all support version 5.2, then you'll be on a 5.2 zone. And in fact, schools have the ability to update their own firmware. So one of the things you can do, and I think not many people know this, but Adam, if you could close that one for us, what you can do is if you select a zone, you can go to the More menu at the top, and the More menu allows you to change your AP firmware. And from here, schools can actually select the version of firmware that they want their APs to be on, which is kind of cool.
It only shows up if you have it uploaded.
Yeah.
So that's why you don't see anything.
Cool. So that's how the AP firmware is set at zone level. We do have a couple of schools that have 2 zones, which is it's not ideal. So we have a couple of schools that have both 7982s and R650s. Now, the access point configuration and the Wi-Fi network configuration lives at zone level. So if you have 2 zones, you have to maintain 2 sets of configuration. But it is possible, if you're really stuck and there's no other option, it is possible to have 2 zones across a school. And what we recommend is you take all of the really old access points, put them all in the same building, so that when roaming takes place, you're roaming between the same zone. And then if you move to a different location in the school, then you can go to the other zone. But this process normally happens automatically. The client device will automatically connect. If you've got the same SSID and same authentication options set, client devices will roam between zones without too much trouble. It's not ideal though, because you have to maintain 2 sets of Wi-Fi network configuration.
Just a question on that, a little bit aside. On the old zone director, Wi-Fi isolation was per AP.
Yes.
On the new SmartZone, it seems to be per SSID.
Yeah, correct. It's actually, I think it's both. It might have changed. Originally on the SmartZone, we had 2 tick boxes. One of them said isolate on the same AP, and another tick box said isolate for the entire network.
Right.
But I think we may have done away with the isolate on this individual AP.
Okay.
But you're right, that it is per wireless network now.
Yeah.
Excellent. Cool, let's switch back. So just a note, once the AP is talking to the controller, you can no longer browse to the web page of the AP. The local web server on the AP is disabled once it's communicating to a controller. And this is really for security reasons. Go ahead.
Can you still factory it back to?
Absolutely.
It's all SSH.
You can still
There is a trick actually. Do you want to do this, Adam? Do you want to SSH? Are we still upgrading? You know what? We're rebooting. We can't do it. Sorry. But what you can do is you can actually SSH into the AP, and you can run a command. You can go set HTTP server on, and then it will turn it back on. But we advise against this because it's not super secure. Yeah.
Is that probably still using the old super and SP admin credentials if you turn that back on?
Well, the thing, no, so it uses the AP credentials. So the thing to note is, you guys all know this, that to SSH into your access point, it'll be the same password as your zone director admin, right? But how does it work in SmartZone? In SmartZone, you set the admin password at zone level. So each zone has a different AP admin password. Could you maybe show us where that is real quick? So at the zone level, if we edit the zone, if we scroll down a little bit, we come across a login ID. So this is the AP admin logon. So every AP zone will have a different set of credentials. I think, honestly, though, there is a standard one that N4L use. Yeah. They won't tell you. Okay. But what you can do is you can change it. So you actually have full permission to change it.
Okay.
Fun fact. So the other thing you can do, Bo, is you can, we'll get into this a bit later, but you can change it just for one AP. So if you're doing some debug or something like that and you want to get into the SSH on an access point, instead of changing it for every access point in the zone, you can go to an individual access point properties and you can change the SSH login for just one AP. And then you can undo it when you're finished.
So will they get overridden like in a time frame by the zone, or will they just
No, if you do an override at access point or access point group level, and we'll talk about that a bit later, then it's permanent until someone undoes the override. Yep.
But once you undo the override, it will
Revert.
get back out from the.
It reverts back to
It'll
the
go
zone
back to the
password.
zone. So the zone is like the default config,
Yep.
and then you can override it.
Yep. Okay, cool. So look, we've basically done this already. So the first time the access point connects to the SmartZone, it will establish a relationship with the SmartZone. And what they do is the first connection is actually an HTTPS connection, because we use HTTPS to do an encrypted connection, and then we exchange private public SSH keys over the HTTPS tunnel. And so HTTPS is established just the first time, and then after that we install an SSH certificate on the AP, and then that certificate is used for the AP to establish its SSH tunnel to the controller from that point forward.
Can it be a self-signed cert, or does it have to be a real cert?
It's self-signed, and it's actually it's managed automatically, so you don't even have to do this manually. It's the SmartZone internally creates the cert and does that between the AP and the SmartZone. And once it has been connected, so we just discussed this, so you move it from the staging zone to your actual zone. We've just been through that process. And then once it's moved, the access point will go ahead and update its firmware, and it will download its zone level configuration data. And then you'll see it will be online and fully established, fully connected. You can also see the events. So from there, you could go to the event page and you can go, hey, look, this AP, it connected, it had its configuration updated, and now it's good to go.